Today we're going to build this password generator using only HTML CSS in JavaScript. Pressing generate will create a random password. You can copy it to your clipboard, adjust the length of the password with a slider that has a colored track that we will style with only CSS. And if you want, you can include numbers or symbols with our custom toggles. And the cool thing is, it also shows how strong your password is with the strength meter. And we will only use HTML CSS in JavaScript, so no frameworks and no dependencies. So let's get started. The first thing we want to do is to create a new file called index.html. Then use emmet to generate the HTML boilerplate. The title will be password generator. We will also link to the Google Fonts CDN to import the Roboto font. You can find the link at Google Fonts. Next, we want to set up our basic CSS file. First, link the CSS inside the head document. Then create a new folder called CSS and the file main.css inside that folder. Note, I will only briefly explain the CSS, but you can find the complete style sheet in the description down below. First, we will target the root element and create our color palette that will be available throughout the entire project. Then we do your usual CSS reset. Next, we will target body and give it a dark background color and a white color for the text. We will also style the basic typography for this project. In the HTML file, we add a main tag to enclose our content. Inside the main tag, we create a new div element with the class container. In the CSS file, we style the container class with flexbox properties, creating a centered layout. It uses display flex for flexible positioning, flex direction column to stack items vertically, and justify content center and align items center to center the items both vertically and horizontally. The container has a maximum width of 450 pixels and a minimum height of 100% viewport height, filling the screen vertically. Margin auto horizontally centers the container. Next, we add a span element with the class alert inside the existing container div. This element will be used to display a message indicating that the generated password has been copied to the clipboard. Then we style the alert class inside our CSS file. It has a visibility hidden rule to initially hide the alert message. Margin bottom creates spacing between the alert message and other elements within the container. Now we will add the top bar to the container. It will contain the password and the copy button. We will use font awesome to add the copy icon to the button. We will use the eye element to display the copy icon. You can find the correct icon class names on the Font Awesome website. Don't forget to link to Font Awesome inside the head document. Let's style the new classes we just added. Top bar sets the display to flex, justifies the content and space between, aligns items center, and applies padding, background color, and a border radius. The password class styles the password title with a larger font size, font weight, color, and letter spacing. The copy button class sets the cursor to pointer and defines the size for the copy button. Finally, the copy hover class changes the color of the copy button to our primary color when the user hovers over it. Let's now add the form container and the actual form. The form will contain the slider for the password length, the toggles, the strength meter, and the generate password button. In the CSS file, the form container class sets the width to 100%, adds top margin, padding, background color, and a border radius. The password form class sets the display to flex, flex direction to column, aligns items to center, and adds a gap between the elements. Next, we will add the actual character length slider. We start with a container first for the slider and one for the label. The label container will have a label and a span element to display the current value, which will be updated through JavaScript later. Then we add the slider itself as an input. The input will have a min value of 1, a max value of 30, and a default value of 10. This is how it looks by default. For our CSS, the slider container class sets the width to 100%. The label container class will create the gap between the value and the label. We'll set a font size for the label and the span element. The span element have a different color. The input type range class styles the actual slider with an appearance, width, height, background, and cursor. Appearance none will remove the browser's default styling. WebKit appearance none will do the same for WebKit-based browsers, such as Safari. This class and this one style the range of the slider for different browsers. It's basically an extension to the default input type range class. The next two classes style the thumb of the range slider for different browsers. It also styles the color progress bar. The way it works is that we set a big shadow box, but because of the overflow hidden property on the input, we only see a small part of the box shadow. This creates the illusion of a colored track. If we were to remove the overflow hidden property, we would see the full box shadow. As you can see, with overflow hidden, only the shadow on the input itself is shown. This neat little trick essentially creates the colored slider. Now let's add the two toggle switches. We will create a container for each switch. The span element will hold the label. The label element will hold the toggle switch. We use the label tag because the browser can associate with the input better. The input element will have a checkbox, but with CSS, we will hide it and create our own toggle. The span element will be the toggle slider. We will style it to look like a switch. This is how it will look like before CSS. Back in our CSS file, the switch container class sets a container for the switch with flexbox properties, aligning and creating space between them. Then we send a font size for a span element. Next, we style the toggle switch class, which is the container for the toggle. This input class will hide the input, the default HTML checkbox. Toggle slider styles a rounded pill where the thumb will slide from left to right. The round thumb is actually styled with the toggle slider before class. The input check plus toggle slider class changes the background color of the toggle slider when the checkbox is checked, meaning if we toggle the switch on. The before attribute creates the animation where we toggle the switch on. Now our toggles look much better and they also work. We can now move on to the password strength meter. Back in our HTML, we add the strength meter. This section displays the strength of the general password using 4 bars. In our CSS file, the strength meter class sets the container for the strength meter with flexbox property, aligning items and providing space between them. The span element will be uppercase, has a font size and color. The burst class is a container for each bar and creates space between them. Each bar has a fixed width and height, and a default light gray border. The coloring will be done with JavaScript. You can see that the strength meter is already looking good. Finally, we add the submit button. This button will generate the password and submit the form. The button has a submit button class and a submit icon class for the arrow icon that is also from the Font Awesome library. The submit button is a block element with a fixed width and padding. It has a background color, a cursor symbol, and no border. The font size is 1.25 rm, and the font weight is set to 700, and the color is white. The text is uppercase, has letter spacing, and no text decoration. On hover, the background color changes. With the HTML and CSS in place, the password generator will look like this. However, we now need to add the JavaScript to make it work. Create a new file called main.js inside the JS folder. But before we start writing the JavaScript code, we need to add the main.js file to the HTML file. Add the script tag before the closing body tag inside our HTML document. We first create an empty, immediately invoke function expression to wrap all the code. This is a good practice to avoid polluting the global scope. Then, we create 2 helper functions to select DOM elements. The dollar function will select a single element, and the double function will select multiple elements. Both functions use the document.querySelector and document.querySelectorAll methods, respectively. Next, we create a DOM object that will contain all the DOM elements we need to select. We use the previously created helper functions to select the elements and store them in the DOM object. Now to check if our JavaScript is being loaded, we can log the DOM object to the console. If everything is correct, you should see the DOM object in the console. As you can see, the DOM object contains all the DOM elements we need to select. Now let's start building the functionality of the password generator. We first create a click event listener to the copy button. When the copy button is clicked, we call the copy to clipboard function and pass the current password as an argument. Then we want to show the alert message. After 3 seconds, we want to hide the alert message. Next, let's create the copy to clipboard function. The copy to clipboard function is an async function that uses the clipboard API to copy the password to the clipboard. We first check if the clipboard API is supported in the browser. If the browser supports it, we write the password to the clipboard. However, we throw an error if the clipboard API is not supported. Then, we want to update the character length label when the user uses the slider. We add an event listener to the character length input. Every time the user changes the character length, we update the character length label. Finally, we create a click event listener for the submit button. We first prevent the default form submission. Then we get the current character length and the state of the numbers and symbols switch. To create a password, we will pass these values to the generate random password function. The return value of the function will change the HTML content of the password element. Let's create the function. It takes 3 parameters: length, the desired length of the password, include numbers, a boolean indicating whether to include numbers in the password, and include symbols, the same thing for symbols. We first need to create character sets that the function will use to create the password. We have 4 different character sets: lowercase characters, uppercase characters, number characters, and symbol characters. The short set variable is a string that contains all the characters that the password can contain. We start with the lowercase and uppercase characters. If the user wants to include numbers, we add the numbers characters to the chart set variable. If the user wants to include symbols, we add the symbol characters to the variable. The final password is initialized as an empty array. We then use a for loop to generate individual characters of the password. The number of times the loop will be executed is based on the length argument that will be passed. In each iteration, a random index within the length of the chart set variable is generated. A random character is then selected from the chart set based on the random index. Then the random character is pushed to the password array. After the loop is finished, we join the password array into a string and return it. However, the function is not yet finished, because if we run the generated password long enough, you will notice that sometimes, even though we have the numbers or symbol switch turned on, the generated password does not contain any numbers or symbols. This is because the random index can sometimes only select letters, so we need to make sure that if any of the Boolean arguments are true, that the generated password contains at least either of them. First, let's create a new function called replaceRandomChar. This function takes a password string and a replacement character. It then generates a random index within the length of the password string. It then splits the password string into an array, replaces the character at the randomly generated index with the replacement character, and then returns the array. This function will be used to replace a random character in the generated password with a number or symbol. Now we can modify the generate random password function. We will add 2 new variables called hasNumber and hasSymbol and set them to false. These variables will be used to keep track of whether or not the generated password contains a number or symbol. Inside the for loop where we generate the random characters, we will add 2 if statements. If the include numbers flag is set to true and the random generated character is a number, the hasNumber flag is set to true. Similarly, if the include symbols flag is true and the random generated character is a symbol, the hasSymbol flag is set to true. After the loop, the function checks if the numbers toggle is on and the password does not contain a number. If so, it generates a random index for the numbers char string and uses the replaceRandomChar function to replace a random character in the password with a selected number character. Likewise, it checks if symbols toggle is on and the password does not contain a symbol. If so, it generates a random index for the symbols char string and replaces a random character in the password with a selected symbol character using the replaceRandomChar function. Finally, if both toggles are on, but the password still doesn't have either a number or a symbol, it generates a new random index and, if necessary, replaces a character with a number, increments the index, and replaces another character with a symbol. The reason why we need to increment the index is to ensure that if a number replacement is made in the password string, the subsequent symbol replacement has a different index, so we don't accidentally replace the new number character with a symbol. By using the modulo operator, we ensure that the incremented index never exceeds the length of the password string. The password generation process is now fully functional, but if we generate a new password for 30 characters, it will overflow inside the top bar. Let's fix that by setting the font size on the password based on its length. Create a new function called setFontSize. It's pretty straightforward. The font size is updated by assigning the appropriate value to the style.fontSize property of our password element inside our DOM object. Add the function to the submit button event listener. Now when we generate a new password, the font size will be adjusted based on its length. Finally, we want to style the password strength meter. To do so, we calculate the password strength and style the strength bars accordingly. We use a simple scoring system to calculate the strength of the password. Create a new check password strength function that takes in the password and returns the score. First, initialize the score variable to 0. Then check if the password contains at least one special character using a regular expression. If a special character is found, it increments the score by 10. The same thing for digits. If a number is found, increment the score by 10. Next, the function evaluates the length of the password against a series of conditions using if and else if statements. If the length is less than 8, the score is set to 0, indicating a weak password. If the length is between 8 and including 12, the score is increased by 10, so on and so forth. Finally, the function returns the calculated score. We want to use the score to style the bars accordingly, so we need to pass the score to a new function that styles the bar. First, create a style bars function that takes in a start index, an end index, background color, and border color. This function will be used to style the bars. Inside the function, create a for loop that loops from the start index to the end index. Inside the loop, set the background color and border color of each bar using the style property. Now create a new setBars function that takes in a score. First, we want to reset the style of all the bars. Call the styleBars function and pass in 0 for the start index, the number of bars for the end index, dark for the background color, and light gray for the border color. Next, we want to check the score against a series of conditions using if and else if statements. If the score is less than 10, we set the first bar to red. If the score is less than 20, we set the first 2 bars to yellow. If the score is less than 40, we set the first 3 bars to yellow. Otherwise, we set all the bars to green. Finally, call the setBars function inside the submit event listener and pass the check password strength function as an argument. This will now style the bars according to the strength of the password. With that, the password generator is finally complete. If we play around with the settings, we can see that strength meter also changes its color. If we click the copy button, the password is copied to the clipboard. If we turn on the toggles, the new password has numbers and symbols. That's it for this tutorial. I wrap it up here. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.